We're going to be going over the hair, the scalp, the diseases and disorders of the hair and scalp today. I see that one of the first words here, scientific study of hair, its diseases and care, is called trichology, and I got myself in a mite of trouble with a student with that one time. We were talking about the different things, and I know y'all have heard us referred to as beauticians, hairdressers, hairstylists, cosmetologists, and when I went over this, I said you can even be a trichologist because you're studying the hair and its diseases and all that. I forgot about saying it, and we were having a little celebration at the end of the quarter, and she said she was just tired of people. She had went to work in a salon and said, I'm tired of people calling me a beautician. I don't like that phrase at all. I said, cosmetologist, that seems kind of, you know, too much for around here. And said, you told me a T word one time I could be called, but I can't remember what it is. I want you to tell me what it is, and I could not think of it to save my life, what she was talking about. And I finally decided I must have just been messing with her, pulling some type of joke on her. But trichology is actually the scientific study of the hair and its diseases. And in order to understand some of the things that can happen with hair, we want to understand about the hair itself. And some of this is going to be a little repetitious. I realize we've been over some of it. Some of it we've alluded to in conversations such as the zone of keratinization and how it grows and all that. The integument is the outer covering that encloses the entire body. And if you remember the skin being called a system, it was called the integumentary system. Y'all remember that? The integument includes the hair, skin, and nails, and is the largest and fastest growing organ of the human body. Full-grown human hair is divided into two parts, the hair root and the hair shaft. And when people get hair color or relaxers, they come and say they want their roots done. You heard that? One of the companies right now has cashed in on home hair coloring products for roots only. Y'all seen that ad? For roots. Fact of the matter is we can't do anything with the roots because the hair root is the portion of the hair located below the surface of the scalp. That they want to get done or retouched is actually new growth. But that's street talk, hair roots. The hair shaft is the portion of the hair that projects above the skin. The main structures of the hair root are the follicle, the bulb, the papilla, the erector pili muscle, and sebaceous glands. Just yesterday I had a group I was lecturing on about the papilla. And when anything happens to a hair papilla, either the hair that comes back through that follicle will be weak or malformed, or if that papilla is destroyed, there will be no hair to come out of that follicle again. That's sometimes why you see somebody that's received a deep wound, they got a scar there, and you'll notice there's never any hair because that injury destroyed the papilla. The follicle is the tube-like depression or pocket in the skin or scalp that contains the hair root. Hair follicles are distributed all over the body with the exception of the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet. The follicle grows downward from the epidermis into the dermis, where it surrounds the dermal papilla. It is not uncommon for more than one hair to grow from a single follicle. But if you'll notice sometimes when there is two hairs there and that's where one's pushing the other one out as it grows, it will cause a little pustule or pimple there because one of them is dead and should actually be gone, but it just hadn't left yet. And the other one's trying to push it out, so you get a little sore place. The hair bulb is the lowest area or part of a hair strand. It is the thickened, club-shaped structure that forms the lower part of the hair root. The lower part of the hair bulb fits over and covers the dermal papilla. The dermal papilla is a small cone-shaped elevation that is located at the base of the hair follicle that fits into the hair bulb. The dermal papilla contains the blood and nerve supply that provides the nutrients needed for hair growth. The erector pili is a minute, involuntary muscle fiber in the skin that has been inserted at the base of the follicle. Fear or cold causes it to contract, and the hair seems to stand up straight, resulting in goosebumps. And sometimes if you get real scared, they'll say, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Sebaceous glands are the oil glands of the skin. They're connected to the hair follicles. The sebaceous glands secrete an oily substance called sebum, which lubricates the hair and skin. And we go back often when we think about the sebum in hair. We didn't talk about this so much in skin when we talked about the sebaceous glands. But when we talk about it in relation to the hair, the rule used to be every night you brush your hair 100 strokes. Have y'all seen that on movies and TV? Well, that is the best thing that your client can do, or you can do for your hair, especially these people that have dry hair and scalp problems, is to brush that sebum through. Bring it through to the ends, because usually the ends of the hair are going to be a lot drier than that close to the scalp. And there is some good conditioners on the market, but there is nothing to compete with natural sebum from that client. So you might want to recommend that or remember that as you have clients that have dry scalp and hair problems, that they can help some of it simply by brushing and pulling that all the way through the hair shaft. And you need to do that with a bristle brush. And now y'all learning the difference in brushes. You know, your vent brush and your cushion brush. Your bristle brush does that because it has hair-like fibers in it that helps really to distribute it. Some structures of the hair shaft. The three main layers of the hair shaft are the cuticle, the cortex, and the medulla. We do this a lot, don't we? Keep going back to the same thing. The cuticle is the outermost layer of hair. It consists of a single overlapping layer of transparent, scale-like cells that overlap like shingles on a roof, or if you prefer, like scales on a fish's back. They look kind of like, when you see pictures of them, they look kind of like scales on a fish's back. And you know, when we start to clean that fish, we go against those scales and raise them up so we can tear them loose. And of all things, although we don't really want to tear up the cuticle scales, we do the same thing with the hair. We'll push them back in the opposite direction and rough them up and put chemicals on them that raise them and make them stay up. A healthy compact cuticle layer is the hair's primary defense against damage. A lengthwise section of hair shows that although the cuticle scales overlap, each individual cuticle scale is actually attached to the cortex. These overlapping scales makes up the cuticle layer. When viewed in cross-section, the scales can be seen to overlap, but it is important to note that the hair has only one cuticle layer. Just like fish, you know, they have only one layer of scale, so there's not cuticle on top of cuticle. Swelling the hair raises the cuticle layer and opens the space between the scales, which allows liquids to penetrate. If there were more than one cuticle layer and they were stacked on top of each other, nothing would be able to penetrate the hair. Therefore, none of our chemical services would be possible. A healthy cuticle layer protects the hair from penetration and prevents damage to the hair fibers. Oxidation hair colors, permanent waving solutions, and chemical hair relaxers must have an alkaline pH in order to penetrate the cuticle layer and to reach their target within the cortex. Then we have the cortex. It is the middle layer of the hair. It's fibrous protein core formed by elongated cells that contain melanin pigment. About 90% of the total weight of the hair comes from the cortex. Do y'all remember, or was I with another group, when we talk about the cortex provides 30% of the strength, the cuticle provides 30% of the strength of hair? Y'all remember that? Somewhere along the lines. But try to remember that 90% of the total weight of the hair comes from the cortex. The elasticity of the hair and its natural color are the result of unique protein structures located within the cortex. The changes involved in oxidation, hair coloring, wet setting, thermal styling, permanent waving, and chemical hair relaxing all take place within the cortex. Y'all remember that because that's where our bonds are. You remember if we're going to do the shampoo and set or do a style, we're going to break the hydrogen bonds and reform them. If we're going to do a permanent wave, we've got to break the disulfide bonds also and reform them. The medulla is the innermost layer, sometimes referred to as the pith of the hair. It's composed of round cells. It's quite common for very fine and naturally blonde hair to entirely lack a medulla. Generally, only thick, coarse hair contains a medulla. All male beard hair contains a medulla. Beard hair is generally much coarser and not as uniform as hair from the head of the same individual. As far as we're concerned, the medulla is an empty airspace, and it doesn't involve us one way or another. We had a microscope in here up until we remodeled, and something happened to it in the process of everything being moved out. But it was really interesting. You could see the cuticle layer. You couldn't see the actual scales, you know, because we didn't have one quite that strong. You could see the cortex, and we had a time finding a medulla to look at. And oftentimes when we could finally find somebody that had a medulla, we'd chase them down every quarter so different students could see it. But if you got a strand of hair this long, the medulla would not run all the way through that strand of hair. You just have a little dark place and then a space with nothing and a little dark space. So medullas are not even consistent when they're in a hair strand. They may not go all the way through that hair strand. It was very interesting. The chemical composition of hair. Hair is composed of protein that grows from cells originating within the follicle. This is where the hair shaft begins. As soon as these living cells form, they begin their journey upward through the hair follicle. They mature in a process called keratinization. As these newly formed cells mature, they fill up with a fibrous protein called keratin, then move upward, lose their nucleus, and die. By the time the hair shaft emerges from the scalp, the cells of the hair are completely keratinized and are no longer living. The hair shaft that emerges from the scalp is a non-living fiber composed of keratinized protein. We used to study keratinization a lot more in depth than what we do now, and the boards eventually moved it off, but it was really interesting as you went through. And some of y'all I've already given the chemistry book as an older book, give it to work on your pH scale. I know you've had it, and I'm going to lay it out for the rest of y'all, but take time and go through and look at the zone of keratinization, because it's really interesting, and because it shows how our food that we eat is turned into substances through the digestive system and eventually goes into the bloodstream, where a lot of our body cells are fed from and repaired from and all that. But especially with hair, it shows the amino acids beginning to hook back up with each other from the proteins we've ate, and they hook back up end on end. That's our peptide bonds. And it's just a bloody mush to start with as it starts into the zone of keratinization. And that's the only bonds it has to start with are the peptide bonds. And as it moves up, it begins to form the side bonds then, which would be your disulfide and salt and hydrogen bonds. Hair is approximately 91% protein. The protein is made up of long chains of amino acids, which in turn are made up of elements. Y'all remember what an element is? You remember what an element is? It's a pure substance. That's the only thing it is. The elements that make up human hair are carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and sulfur. These 5 elements are also the major elements found in skin and nails and are referred to as the Chon's elements. You know that sulfur is present in hair if you've ever smelled any burn, because it stinks. Let's go over our percentage of each one of these elements in the hair, because some of these books are wrong. So I want you to be sure and follow along in your book in case you have the wrong percentages, so I can give you the correct ones. The element carbon, there's 5% in normal hair. The element oxygen, there's 6%. The element hydrogen, there's 17%. And nitrogen, 21%. And sulfur, 51%. The amino acids, which are the units of structure in protein, are linked together end to end like pop beads. The chemical bond that joins amino acids to each other is called a peptide bond, or end bond. A long chain of amino acids linked by peptide bonds is called a polypeptide chain. Polypeptide chains intertwine around each other in a spiral shape called a helix. The The cortex, which is the middle layer of the hair, is made up of millions of polypeptide chains. The polypeptide chains are then cross-linked together like a ladder by 3 different types of side bonds, those being your hydrogen bonds, your salt bonds, and your disulfide bonds. These side bonds hold the hair fibers in place and account for the incredible strength and elasticity of human hair. These side bonds are essential to wet sets, thermal styling, permanent waving, and chemical relaxing. If you pull one hair out of your head, you can break it pretty easily. But sometimes when somebody's having a lot of hair cut off, take 20 strands and try to pull and break them. They're very strong. Very, very strong. If you cut some off your mannequin, even take 10 or 15 and you'll find out you're not going to break them quite so easily, because together they are strong. A hydrogen bond is a physical side bond that is easily broken by water or heat. Although individual hydrogen bonds are very weak, there are so many of them they account for about 1/3 of the hair's overall strength. Here we go. A salt bond is also a physical side bond, but it is broken by changes in pH. Salt bonds are easily broken by strong alkali or acidic solutions and account for about 1/3 of the hair's overall strength. A disulfide bond is a chemical side bond that differs greatly from the kind of physical bonding that we see in hydrogen or salt bonds. A disulfide bond joins the sulfur atoms of 2 neighboring cysteine amino acids to create cysteine. Although there are far fewer disulfide bonds than hydrogen or salt bonds, disulfide bonds are much stronger, and they account for about 1/3 of the hair's overall strength. Disulfide bonds are not broken by heat or water. Permanent waves and chemical hair relaxers change the shape of hair by chemically changing the hair's disulfide bonds. Thiopermanent waves break disulfide bonds, which are reformed by thioneutralizers. Hydroxide chemical relaxers break disulfide bonds, which are then converted to lanthanide bonds when the relaxer is rinsed from the hair. The disulfide bonds that are broken by hydroxide relaxers are broken permanently and can never be reformed. And y'all remember about breaking the bonds, and I commented then that I don't like the term breaking because it makes it sound like we're breaking apart. But what happens where they're attached there, we just allow hair to slide into new positions. We weaken the bond an awful lot, especially when we go through lanthanization and we're not able to neutralize it again, and it's in that shape. In our thiochemical waves, we're able to reform it back into that new, now curly shape we have. So I don't really like that break. Let's talk about our bonds a little bit again in comparison. A hydrogen bond is a side bond, is a weak physical bond, can be broken by water or heat, reformed by drying or cooling. Salt bond is also a side bond. It's a weak physical bond. Changes in pH break it, and normalizing pH reforms it. Disulfide bond is a side bond, but it is a strong chemical bond. It can be broken by thioperms and thiorelaxers, and also by hydroxide relaxers. If we break it with a thioperm or thiorelaxer, we can reform it with oxidation in a neutralizer form. If we break it by hydroxide relaxer, that disulfide bond is then converted to a lanthanide bond. Peptide bonds now are N bonds. You notice that's the only N bond we've got. It's a strong chemical bond. Can be broken by chemical depilatories. Cannot be reformed because the hair dissolved. Do y'all understand what a chemical depilatory is? Chemical depilatory is like Neat or Nair hair removers that you put on, and it dissolves the hair and makes it a kind of a soft jelly-like substance, and then you rub it off with the bath cloth or something. That's what a depilatory is. Depilatory's main ingredient is usually sodium hydroxide. Do y'all remember what else is usually sodium hydroxide? We just studied it. What else is main ingredient is sodium hydroxide? Our relaxers. That's a scary thought. that we take the curl out of hair with the same chemical that we dissolve hair. The concentration is a lot greater in our depilatory than it is in a relaxer, but it does tell us if we choose a real strong relaxer and leave it on too long, what's going to happen to the hair. All natural hair color is the result of the pigment located within the cortex. Melanin is the tiny grains of pigment in the cortex that give natural color to the hair. The two different types of melanin are eumelanin and pheomelanin. Eumelanin provides brown and black color to hair. Pheomelanin provides natural hair colors from red and ginger to yellow blonde tones. All natural hair color is the result of the ratio or amount of eumelanin to the amount of pheomelanin, along with the total number and size of the pigment granules. Our wave patterns. The wave pattern of the hair refers to the amount of movement in the hair strand and is described as straight, wavy, curly, and extremely curly. And y'all understand that from your own hair. You know if you've got straight, wavy, curly, or whatever. Wave pattern is the result of genetics and racial background. Although there are exceptions, as a general rule, Asians tend to have extremely straight hair. Caucasians tend to have straight to wavy hair, and African Americans tend to have extremely curly hair. But any of these types of hair can be found on any nationality of person. The wave pattern may also vary from strand to strand on the same person's head. In other words, if you've got real curly hair, you may notice a place or two that is not as curly. It's not uncommon for an individual to have different amounts of curls in different areas of the head. Individuals with curly hair often have straighter hair in the crown and curlier hair in other areas. And I can't speak for that because my hair is very, very straight. I can tell you it is straight all over my head. The wave pattern doesn't change anywhere. It goes from straight to straighter. But I have seen a lot of people with curly hair where it varied a great deal. Several different theories seek to explain the cause of naturally curly hair, but there is no single definite answer that explains why some hair grows straight and other hair grows curly. The most popular theory claims that the shape of the hair's cross-section determines the amount of curl, and this cross-section business is something that cosmetology instructors have fought about in this book for years. Because when we're talking about a cross-section of hair, we're talking about taking a hair like this and splitting it down the middle to get a cross-section. This theory states that the hair with a round cross-section is straight, hair with an oval cross-section is wavy, and hair with a flat cross-section is curly. Although it is true that cross-sections of straight hair tend to be round and curlier hair tends to be more oval, modern microscopes have shown that a cross-section of hair can be almost any shape, including triangular. The shape of the cross-section does not always relate to the amount of curl. And you know what? I don't know about y'all as you read through this, but I frankly don't care about a cross-section. You know, I mean, it's of no use to me in my business. It's not going to help me deal with the hair better or understand what goes on with the chemicals, so why worry about it? Although it is still only a theory, it is now believed that natural curl is the result of one side of the hair strand growing faster than the other. Since the side that grows faster is slightly longer than the slower growing side, tension within the strand causes the long side of the curl around the short side. Hair that grows uniformly on both sides does not create tension and results in straight hair. I can live with that. That sounds, you know, that makes sense. The hair's wave pattern is independent of its other properties. Hair has different diameters from fine to coarse, regardless of its wave pattern. All hair extremely straight to extremely curly and everything in between comes in different textures and densities. Straight hair can be any hair type without regard to texture or density. Like all other wave patterns, straight hair can be fine, coarse, or medium, dense or thin. Straight hair has a fairly regular and uniform diameter along a single strand. All right, when we're talking about diameter, we're talking about we take one strand and go down it and see, because a lot of hair, and especially this is true with curly hair, it goes along here and it's this big, and then it goes down, it's like that. goes down at you know what I'm saying? The diameter is not consistent in curly hair. Cross sections of wavy hair are usually oval and have a fairly regular and uniform diameter along a single strand. Extremely curly hair grows in long twisted spirals. Cross sections are highly oval and vary in shape and thickness along their length. Compared to straight or wavy hair, which tends to possess a fairly regular and uniform diameter along a single strand, extremely curly hair is quite irregular. Some extremely curly hair has a natural tendency to form a coil like a telephone cord, and we call them spirals. Coiled hair usually has a fine texture with many individual strands winding together to form the coiled locks that characterize this type of hair. Coiled hair usually has low elasticity. It breaks easily and has a tendency to knot, especially on the ends. Gentle scalp manipulations, conditioning shampoos, and a detangling rinse help minimize this so that we don't be pulling on it. It's fragile, and the last thing we want to do is pull and stretch it. Hair analysis. This is not your first introduction to hair analysis, because we started out before we started doing our permanent waves or our chemical relaxers to analyze the hair. Until we learn to analyze the hair successfully, we cannot choose the correct chemicals to get what we want to get out of that hair. So all of our salon services should begin with a thorough analysis of the client's hair type and its present condition in order to determine beforehand what kind of results we can expect. Different types of hair react differently to the same service, so it's essential that a thorough analysis be performed. Hair analysis is performed by observation using the senses of sight, touch, hearing, and smell. The four most important factors to consider in hair analysis are texture, porosity, elasticity, and density. Other factors that you should also be aware of are the growth pattern as well as dryness and oiliness. Growth pattern is like when we talk about the natural part, and why people get a natural part in different places is because this hair starts growing this way and this to this side. And when you see different people have different growth patterns, this usually slopes downward on a lot of people. Mine goes right up. You'll notice in crowns you'll see people with cowlicks in the crown. And occasionally you'll see somebody that's got a cowlick right here and this hair goes straight up in the air. So that's what they're talking about with growth patterns. Hair texture is the thickness or diameter of the individual hair strand. It's classified as coarse, medium, or fine. It differs from individual to individual. It may also vary from strand to strand on one person. Coarse hair texture has the largest diameter, is stronger than fine hair, for the same reason that a thick rope is stronger than a thin rope. Coarse hair also has a stronger structure, usually requires more processing than medium or fine hair, and may also be more resistant to our chemicals. It's usually more difficult for hair lighteners, hair colors, permanent wave solutions, and chemical relaxers to penetrate coarse hair. Medium hair texture is the most common and is standard to which other hair is compared. It is considered normal. It doesn't pose any type of problems, and that's what we see the most in the beauty salon, is medium hair. Fine hair has the smallest diameter. It's more fragile. It's easier to process. It's more susceptible to damage from our chemical services than coarse or medium hair. And that's the hair we've got to be gentle with, and that's the hair that we've got to use our milder chemicals on. Hair texture can be determined by feeling a single dry strand between the fingers. Take an individual strand from 4 different areas of the head, the hairline, the temple, the crown, and the nape. Hold the strand securely with one hand while feeding it through the thumb and forefinger of the other. After a while, you begin to notice that difference. And frankly, even now, after my years of experience, I can tell about more from feeling than I can from looking, because I work with my hands all the time on hair. Hair density measures the number of individual hair strands on 1 square inch of scalp. Tells us how many hairs there are on a person's head. Can be classified as low, medium, or high, or we might call it thin, medium, or thick dense. Hair density is different from hair texture in that different individuals with the same hair texture have different densities. And all this is saying is somebody that's got fine hair texture may have very dense hair or have a lot of hairs per square inch. That's usually not the rule, but these rules are not in stone by no means. They vary back and forth. Usually you see somebody with coarse hair, they got a lot of it. And if you see somebody with fine hair, they don't have as much of it. But that's just the average. That doesn't mean it doesn't occur. The average hair density is about 2,200 hairs per square inch. Hair with high density has more hairs per square inch. Let's look at our chart, and it tells us that sometimes it goes by the color of hair also. Blondes may have 140,000 strands on their head. Those with brown hair have about 110,000. Those with black hair have about 108,000. And those with red hair have 80,000. It just goes to show how much things change, because when I studied, redheads had the most hair. So I don't really know what's changed there, peoples or books. Hair porosity is the ability of the hair to absorb moisture. The degree of porosity is directly related to the condition of the cuticle layer. Healthy hair with a compact cuticle layer is naturally resistant to penetration. Porous hair has a raised cuticle layer that easily absorbs water. That resistance to penetration is our best friend. Why? That resistance to penetration is our best friend. Why would that be the case? Permanent waving, it wouldn't matter to us too much, because we've already done all of our work and we just put the lotion on there. But what would happen if we didn't have some resistance and we were applying a relaxer? I think it would damage it. I think it might take out part of it if there was no resistance there. Hair with low porosity is considered resistant. This is a case, and I think we've done this one time before, but we're going to do it again. This is where low is good, high is bad. You know, usually we want the high grade, not the low grade. We do better if we get the high grade. But in this case, low is good, because that means the cuticle scales are low or close to the head. That with high porosity, the cuticle scales are standing open and we don't have any of that resistance. It gives us a working time frame. The texture of the hair is not an indication of porosity. Different degrees of porosity can be found in all hair textures. Although coarse hair normally has a low porosity and is resistant to chemical services, coarse hair can also have high porosity. You can check porosity on dry hair by taking a strand of several hairs from 4 different areas of the head, and we go back to the front hairline, the temple, the crown, and the nape again. Hold the strand securely with one hand while sliding the thumb and forefinger of the other hand from the end of the hair strand now towards the scalp. That way you can feel, if it feels rough, you know the cuticle scales are open. Hair elasticity. I get a lot of questions about elasticity because hair stretches, and by now we know the rule of that. Wet hair stretches 50% or 1/2 of its length and returns. Normal, healthy, dry hair will stretch 20% of 1/5 and return. But there's one sure way to find out about elasticity. A lot of people say, I'm still worried about elasticity when stretching it. I'm not sure, if I stretched it too far, put too much tension and I broke it right off, or stretched it too hard, snatched it or whatever. So I'm having problems here judging elasticity. There's one sure way to tell if the elasticity is gone out of a person's hair. When you wet your hair, and I know all of y'all shampoo your hair, you can feel, and it feels like individual hair strands. Start getting your sense of touch going, now, noticing these things. It'll kind of feel like hair. If the elasticity is gone, it's going to feel like wet cotton. It wants to mush together when it's wet. And when you feel that, that's a warning sign to you. You better stop with the chemical services. It's felt most often on the ends. Those of us that gets perms and color and relaxers and all this stuff on hair and don't have it cut regularly, you're going to feel that right on the ends. So start paying attention to the hair ends of anybody you shampoo and on your own head, because that is a sure sign, no elasticity present. Hair elasticity is the ability of the hair to stretch and return to its original length without breaking. Hair elasticity is an indication of the strength of the side bonds that hold the hair's individual fibers in place. Wet hair with normal elasticity stretches 50% of its original length and returns to the same length without breaking. Hair with normal elasticity holds the curls from wet sets and permanent waves without excessive relaxing. Hair with low elasticity is brittle. It breaks easily. Hair with low elasticity may not be able to hold the curl from wet setting, thermal styling, or permanent waving. Hair with low elasticity is the result of weak side bonds that usually result from previous overprocessing. Chemical services performed on hair with low elasticity require a milder solution with a lower pH. Such a solution minimizes damage and helps prevent additional overprocessing. Growth patterns. It's important when shaping and styling hair to consider the hair's growth patterns. That's why we talk about with styling, if you will go ahead and find their natural part and use that part as part of the style, the hair will stay better for that client. If it parts here and wants to go this way and you get over here and put a part to take it back this way, that hair is eventually going back over here because that's the way the follicles are slanted. Hair follicles do not usually grow perpendicular to the scalp, and that's why we have some problems with those mannequins. We get right here, especially when you're getting cut, and you'll notice it, our hair will lay down smoothly here. That sticks right straight out. It's really aggravating. Most hair follicles on a human head grow at an angle other than 90 degrees. And most hair grows in a direction other than straight out from the head. The growth patterns result in hair streams, whirls, and cowlicks. A hair stream is hair flowing in the same direction. It is the result of follicles sloping in the same direction. Two streams flowing in opposite directions form a natural part in the hair. A whirl is hair that forms in a circular pattern, as in the crown. And you'll notice, especially when you start cutting hair, you can see it. It's almost a complete circle. It looked like a little whirlwind got up there. A whirl normally forms in the crown with all the hair from that point growing down. A cowlick is a tuft of hair that stands straight up. They're usually more noticeable at the front hairline, but they can be located anywhere in the head. Dry hair and scalp. It's caused by inactive or underactive sebaceous glands. It's aggravated by a dry winter or a desert climate. The lack of natural oils or sebum leads to a flaky scalp and hair that appears dull, dry, and lifeless. Dry hair and scalp should be treated with products that contain moisturizers and emollients. Frequent shampooing should be avoided, along with the use of strong soaps, detergents, or products with a high alcohol content, because that aggravates it. Dry hair should not be confused with overly porous hair that we've damaged by thermal styling, environmental forces, or chemical services. Oily hair and scalp. Oily hair and scalp is caused by overactive sebaceous glands. It's characterized by a greasy buildup on the scalp and an oily coating on the hair. Oily hair and scalp can be treated with clarifying or normalizing shampoos. A well-balanced diet, exercise, regular shampooing, and good personal hygiene are essential to control oily hair and scalp. As we go into our next unit, we're going to take up shampooing, and we're going to find that oily hair and scalp is a lot harder to deal with than dry hair and scalp. We kind of keep that in mind. Hair growth. The two main types of hair found on the body are vellus or lanuga and terminal hair. Vellus or lanuga hair is short, fine, and downy hair. We see it on our arms. That's where we pay it the most attention. It's not pigmented and almost never has a medulla. It's commonly found on infants and can be present on children until puberty. On adults, vellus hair is usually found in places that are normally considered hairless, such as your forehead, your eyelids, and a bald scalp, as well as nearly all other areas of the body except for the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet. Women normally retain 55% more vellus hair than men. Terminal hair is the long, soft hair found on the scalp, legs, arms, and bodies of males and females. Terminal hair is coarser than vellus hair, and with the exception of gray hair, it is pigmented. It usually has a medulla and is easily distinguished from vellus hair by its dark color and coarse texture. Hormonal changes during puberty cause some areas of fine vellus hair to be replaced with thicker terminal hair. All hair follicles are capable of producing either vellus or terminal hair depending on genetics, age, and hormonal changes. Let's take a short break and we'll go over the growth cycles of hair.